This is the Big Stories Podcast, where we tell the amazing and inspiring stories from across the Big 12 Conference.
I'm your host, Cleon Wall. The spring sports are dominating the Big 12 right now. As of Monday, Kansas was leading the conference in baseball, and Texas Tech is killing it in softball with a 42-4 overall record. Again, that's as of Monday. It will be interesting to see how the rest of the season plays out for the conference. The Big 12 Track and Field Championships are coming up next month, and yet spring football is on the minds of the Big Stories team, so that's what we're going to be focusing on in the coming weeks. Football. For our storylines, we will focus on one topic and get opinions from our different reporters and podcasters from across the Big 12. And then for story time, we will turn our focus to one team either during spring football or post-spring football. This week, we will talk about Baylor. We are planning on talking about Colorado next week.
The big stories, biggest storylines.
Having a first-year head coach is daunting, yet it can also be exciting. It's a chance to start over with the new guy at the helm. There are 4 schools that fit the bill this upcoming season in the Big 12. That's Utah, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and Iowa State. Now, Utah and Kansas State also have hired guys who used to play and work for the respective alma maters as coordinators. So let's start off with Alex Markham from the Ute Nation Podcast. Morgan Scalley takes over as the new head coach after former head coach Kyle Whittingham stepped down in December, even though he wanted to stay. Here's Alex.
Did Utah make the right decision moving on to Morgan Scalley as their next head coach? I wholeheartedly believe Utah made that right decision. It's obviously not something that you're going to hear a lot nationally right now, but to anybody that has been around that program since he's taken over, anybody that has been inside the football facilities, the athletic department, talked to the alumni, been to spring ball, there is a vibe that is just hitting, that is just resonating, that is just different with this football program. It's a refreshed vibe that also comes along with this approach that if it's not broke, don't fix it. Utah's trademark defense is Utah's trademark defense. It's not going to change. Everybody needs to remember, even though Morgan is a first-time head coach and there's risk with a first-time head coach, he's also been one of the top defensive coordinators in the country for the past decade. That's not going to change when it comes to Utah's defense. He's also a steadfast believer in having a Urban Meyer-style offense to go along with Utah's level of defense. He wholeheartedly believes that Utah can be successful that way. And that is something that could be evolving after witnessing Utah spring ball. Is Utah going to become a pass-heavy team overnight? I'm not gonna say that. And Scalley's not gonna say that either. He's gonna say he's going to beat teams the way that they allow him to beat them. You know, Utah's got a lot of really talented wide receivers this year, including Braden Pagan and Kyrie Scholes being transfers. I could go on and on with the list, but Utah has a lot better group there than they've had in the past. And the offensive system and the way that it's been put together by Kevin McGivern just seems to work. And there's potential for a lot of big plays, you know, when it comes to Utah's offense. So the demise of Utah football, I wouldn't go that fast in saying that. And Utah should be in the conversation for the Big 12 championship and also a very intriguing team to watch for a CFP spot.
Next up is Kansas State. Former QB Colin Klein takes over the team he used to quarterback and call plays for as offensive coordinator. Drew Galloway from K-State Online and on 3 says that Klein will want to take his Wildcats back to basics.
It's all about living in physicality, which is something that Colin Klein pointed out in his opening press conference for K-State, which is just kind of the epitome of K-State football, right? It's all about being physical. It's about having good offensive line play and good defensive line play, being able to run the ball. There will be some differences between the Chris Klieman era and the Colin Klein era in terms of what the offense looks like. It's going to look more like what Texas A&M looked like under Colin Klein. So there'll be some QB run, but not a ton. Probably more 12 personnel, or less 12 personnel than 11 personnel. Probably 3 receivers on the field most of the time. It will be very interesting to see how this works out. And K-State is in a lucky spot where the schedule isn't nearly as difficult as it projects to be in the 2027 season when K-State plays against BYU, Utah, and Texas Tech, and has a road game at NC State. K-State this year is very fortunate, at least on the outside looking in, of what the schedule can look like, because they don't play a power conference, non-conference game. And then the conference opponents, they avoid what is perceived to be the top 3 teams in the league. So K-State is in a spot where if all things go well, even in Colin Klein's first season, K-State could be somebody that is a kind of dark horse Big 12 championship contending team, because the schedule is right there for them to potentially go 8-1 in the Big 12 and maybe 11-1 overall if all things go well. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that falls. But a lot of K-State this year is just going to be kind of getting back to the basics and being very physical, which is something that has been told and said all the time throughout Colin Klein's first few months, and especially during spring football, as the practices are a lot more intense and a lot more physical. So it'll be fun seeing that on the field this fall.
In the next few weeks, we'll catch up with guys about the new head coaches at OSU and Iowa State. It's story time, and let's take an in-depth look at the Baylor Bears and head coach Dave Aranda. I had a chance to catch up with Zach Smith from the Waco Tribune to talk a little about how this team will do under new defensive coordinator Joe Klanderman and what we can expect out of new Bears QB DJ Lagway. But first, I asked him how much they were going to miss former QB Sawyer Robertson.
I mean, it leaves a lot of question marks. That's certain, because Sawyer was just an incredible, not only human, but just a really good leader, and obviously a really, really good quarterback who knew Jake Spavital's offense like the back of his hand. And so it's not just Sawyer that's leaving. He loses Josh Cameron, Michael Trigg, all these playmakers on offense. 4 of 5 along the offensive line are gone. And so, I mean, yes, Sawyer is the cornerstone, but, his departure kind of underscores the vast amount of change for Baylor this offseason. Jake Spavital is back to kind of build this new offense, but, Sawyer was his safety blanket, and Sawyer could get Baylor out of, messes that kind of they get themselves in. So Sawyer's a big loss. And, he, like I said before, he was just an incredible leader and human, and he's just going to be hard to replace in so many ways for Baylor.
Well, and you talk about who else could be lost, and offensive line is and the weapons that your quarterback throws to, those are definitely things to be talked about. But of course, we're in an era, we're just in a sport that everyone seems to focus on the quarterback. So Sawyer leaves, you have a new quarterback coming in. It's former Florida Gators quarterback DJ Lagway. He's a former 5-star recruit, but he's had some ups and downs since his freshman season in Gainesville. His transfer to play for Dave Aranda was a huge story, and I'm just curious how things are going so far for him during spring practices.
Fine, I think. It's hard. We only get to do you trust what Jake Spavital and DJ are saying about how things are going well and they're getting better? I do in a way. We only get to watch the first 15 minutes of every practice, so we only get to see him throw some deep balls to receivers, and even some of those have been a little bit wobbly. They haven't been the best, but there's some really good ones. So I think it's still kind of a wait and see, because like you mentioned, he was very up and down at Florida. And I know that the SEC is kind of a different animal than what he's going to face in the Big 12. And certainly he has the arm talent. I think even watching him in practice for the first 15 minutes, you can see that he throws the deep ball better than anyone on the roster, at least anyone that I've seen since I've been here. And, he certainly has the skills. And I go back to Jake Spavital, what I mentioned with Sawyer, and how, Sawyer kind of became Jake Spavital's safety blanket. I think DJ can do the same thing, just because you look at who Jake Spavital has coached before and kind of the different types of quarterbacks, from Johnny Manziel to Will Grier, these types of quarterbacks who kind of do different things, but all have kind of found their role in this offense and kind of with what Jake Spavital wants to do. And I think that DJ has the opportunity to, I don't want to say resurrect, because I don't think he was ever under, not thought of as one of the best, but I think this gives him an opportunity to kind of be the guy and show that he has the confidence and he has the skills to be the number one quarterback in the class, the 5-star. And I think that at a place like Baylor where his dad played, I think this is kind of it's a lower pressure environment than Florida was, which I think is going to do wonders for just his confidence.
Yeah. Now, despite what's happening on the offensive side of things, the defensive side of things, they struggled the past few years, and now they've hired Joe Klanderman to come in and be the new defensive coordinator. He was the DC at Kansas State for 6 seasons. What might his new perspective and scheme do for the Bears for this upcoming season?
Well, it's completely flipped on the defensive side. Dave Aranda is no longer calling defensive plays. He was for the last 2 years. That's a big shift. He's more of just the CEO kind of head coach, back to what he was when he first got to Baylor and they won a Big 12 championship. But Joe Klanderman's whole deal is predicated on just causing chaos and getting pressure on the quarterback. I think one of the things that Baylor really, really struggled with, in addition to stopping the run, was getting pressure on the quarterback. I think the defensive line last year had I think of the 130 some odd college football teams, they were second to last in the nation in terms of sacks by the defensive line. And so they really might not have brought in these big name players in the transfer portal, but I think the players that they have brought in, Ryan Davis from Kansas State follows Klanderman down, are these guys that are really, really just trying to cause as much chaos up front so that the linebackers and that the edge rushers can get to the quarterback and, like I said, just create havoc, cause chaos, which is a completely different scheme from what the Bears did. And I think, Dave Aranda, like I mentioned before, is no longer calling plays. I think he's really kind of taken it upon himself to be like, all right, I'm just going to let Joe cook kind of way. And just let it worked at Kansas State. I know it fell off kind of towards the end, but it worked for the most part at Kansas State. And I think if he brings that havoc, that chaos up front, especially, it can prove well for the Bears. That's exactly what they need.
You mentioned earlier that it's kind of hard to gauge how well guys are playing just because it's spring ball and you only get to see so much. Mm-hmm. Who are the guys that are standing out? Whether that's through the grapevine, like you're hearing good things, or who are the guys that are just being talked about the most during spring practice at Baylor?
Well, I'd have to mention a wide receiver, Draylon Miller. He's a transfer from Colorado. He did a little bit of everything there. And that Baylor is replacing their top 4 receivers from last year, so there's a big hole to fill. And I think Draylon is very versatile. He can play in the backfield. He can play in the slot. He can even go outside a little bit. And he's been a guy that people are very high on. Lewis Brown is another receiver who played the first 4 games, was getting a lot of love from coaches last year, and then redshirted because they were just so deep at receiver last year, and he just wasn't gonna sniff that top tier. So I think he has a chance to really be the guy. And then on defense, it's a little harder on defense because there's just so many new guys. Like they just completely revamped the defense. But one guy that I've heard a lot of good things about is Stilton McKelvey. He's a cornerback, and I know that LeVar Thornton is kind of the guy at cornerback, but Stilton McKelvey is this guy from Texas, and he went to some smaller schools. He was a JUCO All-American, and I think he's really kind of out to prove that he can do it at this level. And he's kind of a guy that has become a leader. He's on their leadership council, and I really think Stilton McKelvey is a guy that is going to make some plays for the Baylor defense this year. 2021
seems like a long time ago when the Baylor Bears won the Big 12, and it's kind of been an interesting ride for Dave Aranda since then. What does he need to do to accomplish the season that he would like? Of course, you want to go undefeated. That I understand. But how does he manage the expectations of what fans want and what he's expecting from his team so that he can continue to be successful going forward at Baylor?
That's a difficult question because Dave Aranda is I don't think I'm out of line saying he's a different kind of football. He's just a different dude than maybe any other football coach. And I think sometimes that rubs fans the wrong way. When things are going well and you see, them getting a goal line stop against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game, and he's just on there stoic, no emotion. That's really cool. But when you're in a battle to go to a bowl game last year in the season finale against Houston, and there's a bang bang play, and he's also stoic and not like yelling at the refs because it was a penalty or whatever, that fans can get pissed off. And so I think that Dave Aranda is in a really, really difficult spot right now because, it had the athletic director who left at the end of last football season not left. I think there's a very high chance that Dave Aranda is not the football coach right now. But because of all these situations, he kind of knows that this is kind of his last shot. And it's hard to quantify, like, will 9 wins do it? Will a bowl game do it? Will, what is that number? I don't think there's a magic number that's going to save Dave Aranda's job. I think it's more of like, does DJ Legway hit? Is the defense not literally the worst run defense in the country, or in the Big 12? There's other less quantifiable factors that are going to go into whether Dave Aranda can turn this thing around and whether he's going to be around for the long haul. Because yes, like you said, 2021 is a long time ago, and you can only have so much goodwill for winning a Big 12 championship. So, I hope that answered your question, because it's a hard one, because it's just like, he's so, it's not quantifiable. There's no like, if they win 9 games or 10 games or go to the Big 12 championship, is he safe? Maybe, but also maybe not. It's so kind of, especially in today's day and age with the transfer portal and everything, like everything can change in an instant. And especially with Dave Aranda and the kind of the tinderbox that is his job right now, everything is up in the air.
I've talked about this before, but it just surprises me that one of the guys out there in Dave Aranda, who is known as genius is probably overused, but, someone who makes his name calling defenses, how his team has struggled. It's just, it's still baffling to me that this team has struggled the past few years with such bad defenses at Baylor.
I mean, and everybody, like, that was his MO. He was a defensive guru. That was what people called him. And then these last 2 years, like, people almost jokingly call him a defensive guru. Like, how can a defensive guru be this bad? And he's kind of admitted maybe there's some things of the game that have passed him by, and he has to, like, listen. That's kind of the whole point of bringing in Joe Klanderman and kind of revamping the not calling plays on defense. Like, that's kind of the point. But at the same time, you've been here for 6 years. How many lives do you have? And it seems like, so it's a very interesting situation. And it's all with the very interesting guy who is incredibly honest and is not going to give you like a coach speak answer when you ask him directly about his job. Like, it's all a very interesting situation.
That's going to do it for this episode of Big Stories. On Thursday's episode of the pod, you'll hear a story of a big-time Cincinnati fan who turned her fandom into scholarships for athletes who don't get a lot of attention. Kim Dobbs is also serving as a guide for their potential post-college success. That's in a couple days on the Big Stories podcast. A big thanks to Alex Markham, Drew Galloway, and Zach Smith for joining the podcast. Garrett Glauser produced this episode. I'm your host, Cleon Wall, and Big Stories is a production of BYU Radio.